March 18, 1945. Dawn breaks over the waters east of Kyushu, but the rising sun illuminates not the peaceful Pacific of Japanese poetry, but a horizon darkened by the smoke of 100 burning ships. The USS Essex cuts through the swells at 32 knots, her flight deck alive with the thunder of Hellcat fighters launching into the morning sky. Admiral Marc Mitscher stands on the bridge of his flagship, watching wave after wave of American aircraft disappear toward the Japanese mainland. The salt spray carries with it the scent of aviation fuel and the metallic taste of war, while beneath his feet, the steel deck vibrates with the relentless rhythm of democracy's greatest weapon, the fast carrier task force that refuses to retreat, refuses to rest, refuses to grant the enemy a single moment of respite. The concept of sustained carrier operations had been born from American industrial abundance and tactical innovation, but by March 1945, it had evolved into something unprecedented in naval history. A mobile air force capable of maintaining continuous operations for months without returning to port. Task Force 58, under Mitscher's command, had been conducting round-the-clock strikes against Japanese positions for 73 consecutive days. No naval force in history had ever maintained such operational tempo, and the psychological impact on Japanese defenders was devastating beyond any strategic calculation. Japanese naval doctrine had prepared for episodic carrier raids, swift strikes followed by withdrawal, allowing time for repair, resupply, and tactical adjustment. The Doolittle raid of 1942 had followed this pattern: dramatic impact, immediate withdrawal, months of preparation for the next operation. Even the great carrier battles of 1942 and 1943 had been discrete engagements with clear beginnings and endings, allowing both sides to regroup and plan their next moves. But Task Force 58 operated according to different principles entirely. Built around 12 fleet carriers and 8 light carriers, supported by an armada of fast battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, the task force had become a floating city of 100,000 men and 1,200 aircraft. More importantly, it was supplied by a logistics fleet so vast and efficient that it could maintain operations indefinitely without touching friendly soil. The Japanese had never conceived of naval warfare on such a scale. Their own carrier operations, magnificent in their tactical execution, were limited by industrial capacity and logistical constraints that made sustained operations impossible. The 6 carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor represented nearly half of Japan's total fleet carrier strength. By contrast, the Americans were operating 20 carriers simultaneously, while building dozens more in shipyards from Virginia to California. The sound that haunted Japanese defenders was not the roar of engines or the crash of bombs, but something far more psychologically devastating: the continuous drone of American aircraft overhead, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. Lieutenant Colonel Takeshi Mori, commanding the 343rd Air Group at Kanoya Airfield, wrote in his diary, "The Americans never stop coming. We shoot down 10, and 20 more appear. We destroy 50, and 100 more darken the sky. It is as if they have opened the gates of an aircraft factory and pointed it at Japan." This was the signature of Task Force 58's operations, not the dramatic single strikes that Japanese tactical doctrine expected, but waves of continuous attacks that ground down enemy resistance through sheer persistence. American carrier air groups would launch 4 separate strike waves each day, maintaining aircraft over Japanese targets from dawn to dusk. As soon as one strike returned to the carriers, another was already approaching enemy airspace. The psychological warfare embedded in this operational tempo was devastating. Japanese pilots, scrambling to intercept American raids, found themselves facing not specific tactical challenges, but an endless conveyor belt of enemy aircraft. Every successful interception was immediately rendered meaningless by the appearance of more American planes. Every damaged American aircraft was quickly replaced by fresh machines from the seemingly inexhaustible carrier fleet. The Japanese response revealed the fundamental difference between industrial war and warrior culture. Japanese pilots, trained in the samurai tradition of individual combat excellence, threw themselves against American formations with suicidal courage. But courage, however magnificent, could not overcome the mathematics of industrial production. For every Japanese pilot lost, America was training 50 replacements. For every Japanese aircraft destroyed, American factories were producing 10 new ones. The rice ball became the symbol that crystallized Japanese understanding of their impossible situation. Japanese carrier pilots, when they still had carriers to fly from, survived on single rice balls and weak tea before combat missions. Their American counterparts ate steak and eggs, fresh fruit, and real coffee before climbing into cockpits of aircraft that cost more than most Japanese families would earn in a lifetime. The tea contrast was not merely about nutrition, it represented the vast industrial gulf between the two nations. American carriers served ice cream to their crews while operating in tropical waters 1,000 miles from the nearest American base. Japanese pilots were rationed single rice balls while defending their homeland. The rice ball, simple and austere, became the emblem of a nation pushed beyond its material limits by an enemy whose abundance seemed infinite. Captain Minoru Genda, one of the architects of the Pearl Harbor attack, observed this contrast with the analytical mind that had once planned Japan's greatest victory. "We taught our pilots to find honor in deprivation, to find strength in suffering. The Americans taught their pilots to expect abundance, to demand efficiency. When these philosophies met in combat, the outcome was predetermined by industrial capacity, not by spiritual strength." Task Force 58's operational pattern defied every principle of naval warfare that Japanese strategists understood. Traditional carrier operations required extensive periods in port for maintenance, resupply, and crew rest. Carriers were precious assets, to be risked only for decisive engagements that promised strategic gains commensurate with the danger. But Mitscher's task force operated as if carriers were expendable commodities, maintaining continuous operations through a logistics network that rendered traditional strategic calculations obsolete. The secret lay in the fleet train, a floating support infrastructure that brought American industrial capacity directly to the combat zone. Oilers, ammunition ships, supply vessels, repair ships, and floating dry docks allowed Task Force 58 to remain operational for months without returning to port. This was war as American industrial philosophy. Problems solved through abundance rather than efficiency, challenges overcome through resource application rather than tactical brilliance. On March 19, 1945, Task Force 58 demonstrated this philosophy with devastating effect. Striking Kure Naval Base, the heart of Japanese naval construction, the Americans launched 386 sorties in a single day. The attack sank the aircraft carrier Amagi, damaged the battleship Yamato, and destroyed 161 Japanese aircraft on the ground. But the psychological impact exceeded the material damage. Japanese defenders watched American aircraft attack in perfectly coordinated waves, each pilot seemingly indifferent to losses. Each aircraft replaced immediately by fresh reinforcements. Japanese fighter pilot Saburo Sakai, an ace with 64 confirmed victories, described the experience. Fighting the Americans in 1945 was like fighting the ocean itself. You could destroy individual drops of water, but the ocean remained infinite. Every American pilot we shot down was immediately replaced by another who flew with the same confidence, the same abundance of fuel and ammunition, the same certainty that his comrades would continue the attack whether he lived or died. The transformation in Japanese military thinking was profound and permanent. Officers who had begun the war confident in Japanese tactical superiority and spiritual strength found themselves confronting an enemy whose material advantages rendered traditional military virtues irrelevant. The carrier raids of Task Force 58 had become demonstrations of industrial democracy in its most overwhelming form. The numbers told the story with mathematical brutality. Between January and August 1945, Task Force 58 conducted continuous operations for 220 days, launching over 100,000 sorties against Japanese targets. Japanese forces shot down 738 American aircraft during this period, a seemingly impressive total until compared to American production figures. During the same 8 months, American aircraft factories delivered 23,000 new military aircraft to the Pacific Theater. The rice ball had become prophecy. A nation that rationed food to its pilots while defending the homeland could not compete with an enemy that served steak and ice cream to air crews operating thousands of miles from home. The carriers themselves were merely the delivery system for American abundance. Abundance converted into sustained military pressure that never relented, never retreated, never allowed the enemy time to recover or adapt. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the remnants of the Japanese combined fleet, recognized the hopelessness of the situation with the clarity that comes from professional desperation. In his final operational assessment, dated April 15, 1945, he wrote, "The American task forces operate according to principles we cannot match. They possess not merely superior numbers but superior industrial philosophy. We fight individual battles hoping to achieve decisive victory. They conduct continuous operations designed to achieve inevitable victory through sustained pressure. We cannot win battles against an enemy who treats battles as merely one element in an endless industrial process." This recognition marked the complete transformation of Japanese naval thinking from confidence to despair, from strategic optimism to tactical hopelessness. The fast carrier task forces had achieved what no single battle could accomplish. They had demonstrated the fundamental incompatibility between warrior culture and industrial war, between individual excellence and systematic abundance. The daily routine aboard American carriers revealed this industrial approach to warfare. Flight operations began before dawn and continued past midnight, maintained by crews working in precisely timed shifts. Aircraft maintenance followed factory-like procedures, with standardized parts and systematic processes that could repair or replace any component within hours. Pilots flew multiple missions per day, sustained by abundant food, superior equipment, and the absolute confidence that their aircraft would be properly maintained and their missions properly supported. Japanese carriers, by contrast, operated according to craft traditions that emphasized individual skill over systematic efficiency. Each aircraft was maintained by dedicated mechanics who knew every bolt and wire. Pilots flew single missions, followed by extended periods of rest and meditation. The approach produced magnificent individual performances, but could not sustain the operational tempo that American industrial capacity made possible. The final demonstration came on July 24, 1945, when Task Force 58 conducted simultaneous strikes against targets in Japan, Okinawa, and the Philippines. Operations separated by thousands of miles, but coordinated through communications networks that seemed to Japanese observers like manifestations of supernatural power. American carriers operating off Japan launched strikes against inland targets, while their sister ships in Philippine waters attacked Japanese positions in Luzon. The coordination was perfect, the timing precise, the execution flawless. This was industrial warfare perfected. Multiple task forces operating independently but in perfect coordination, each supplied by logistics networks that rendered distance irrelevant, each capable of sustained operations that never paused for rest or resupply. Japanese defenders found themselves facing not individual carrier raids, but a systematic campaign of destruction that operated according to factory schedules rather than military rhythms. The rice ball, simple and austere, had become the symbol of a nation's limitations. Japan could produce excellent individual warriors, magnificent individual weapons, brilliant individual tactics. But excellence could not overcome abundance. Brilliance could not defeat systematic application of superior resources. And individual courage could not withstand the methodical pressure of industrial democracy applied without limit or restraint. The sound of continuous flight operations, engines starting, catapults firing, aircraft landing, became the soundtrack of American victory in the Pacific. Unlike the dramatic single strikes that characterized earlier phases of the war, the carrier operations of 1945 achieved their effects through relentless persistence rather than tactical brilliance. Task Force 58 had become warfare industrialized, democracy's answer to the samurai tradition. Each carrier represented more than naval architecture. It embodied American industrial philosophy in its most overwhelming form. Built by civilian workers in shipyards across the continent, equipped with technologies developed by universities and private corporations, supplied by logistics networks that spanned the globe, the fast carriers were democracy mobilized for total war. The transformation was complete. Japanese military leaders who had begun the war confident in their spiritual superiority and tactical excellence found themselves confronting an enemy whose material advantages rendered traditional military virtues obsolete. The carrier raids had demonstrated that sustained industrial pressure could achieve what individual battles could not. The complete breakdown of enemy resistance through systematic application of overwhelming force. By August 1945, the rice ball had proven prophetic in ways that transcended military symbolism. A nation that rationed food to its defenders while fighting for survival could not compete indefinitely with an enemy that served abundance to its warriors while operating thousands of miles from home. The fast carrier task forces had achieved more than tactical victory. They had demonstrated the fundamental truth that free societies, given time to mobilize their industrial capacity, possess advantages that no amount of initial success can overcome. The DI continuous operations had broken more than Japanese military resistance. They had shattered the philosophical foundations of warrior culture when confronted with industrial democracy. The samurai tradition of individual excellence, spiritual strength, and tactical brilliance had met systematic abundance, methodical efficiency, and inexhaustible resources. The outcome had been predetermined not by courage or skill, but by capacity, the capacity of free peoples to produce, to innovate, and to sustain operations on scales that authoritarian societies could not match.